it's not just Trump who holds this view. It's a significant share of people in his administration and more broadly in the U.S. Public. The U.S. has carried too much of the load for the last 30 years. The U.S. shouldn't have to do that so much anymore. I do think the U.S.'s alliances and partnerships haven't fundamentally served U.S. interests in the way that they should.
大家好，我是范琪斐，
嗨，我是 Melody，
欢迎收看《
匪夷所思》。
那今天我们阿姨想知道，我们还是要谈谈川普。
你真的好爱川普，
现在谁不想谈川普啊？
是啦，
真的他上来之后做了多少改变啊？那我们上次呢，请的是一位大川粉赵君朔嘛，哈，就来谈谈川普的对台政策，他的对外政策啊。但是谈完之后呢，我还是觉得还是有必要找一个真正美国的学者来谈一谈川普的世界观到底是什么，然后在这中间再来看看他对台湾可能的态度是什么。然后我还在这样想的时候，刚好呢就有一位老朋友，就是Kharis Templeman 啊，他中文名字叫齐凯利，他这是在美国专门研究台湾的学者哦，他不是研究中国问题的学者啊，他是研究台湾的学者。那之前齐凯利其实已经有来过我们节目一次了，但是我想他的简历我还是交给梅乐蒂来再跟大家介绍一下。
好，那齐凯利呢？他是美国史丹佛大学胡佛研究院学者。那刚刚有提到他是美国少数研究台湾的专家。我还记得那个时候问他的时候，他说我那时候选择台湾议题的时候，其实非常冷门，大家都在研究中国，只有他选择很冷门的台湾。但是现在风水轮流转，对，现在所有的人，因为只有他研究，所有的人都跑去问他，所以他很热门。我还记得是1年前我们在调大选的时候，对，他就有来上我们节目聊，美国跟台湾的这个关系会在未来川普政府之下会有什么改变？这样
OK， 好，那我最想问他的一个问题啊，就是川普现在这个态度啊，我实在是看不出来，这个印太战略对他来讲到底还重不重要？
说不定根本就已经没有在他的脑袋里了。
对啊，搞不好印太战略他根本就已经丢掉了啊。然后呢，另外一个就是像我们最近才做行动代号2027嘛，哈，那我们就在谈到就是说台湾的重要性，就是第一岛链这个策略。说我也想问问这个 Kharis， 就是他觉得在川普的他的这个世界观里面，这个第一岛链对他或者对美国来讲到底还重不重要？那当然我们也希望说Kharis 可以谈一谈他怎么看这个台积电的这个投资案啦。那除了台积电之外，台湾还有什么牌可以打？另外一个我最想知道的就是川普有没有可能跳过台湾，直接去跟中国谈台湾问题。
OK，
好，来，那梅乐蒂你最想问他什么？
我其实最想要问他2件事。第一个就是我们一直不断提到立法院现在3国防预算嘛，那我们在接种的那一集里面其实就有问说是做这件事情，因为很多的外媒就在讨论啊，台湾你不是最需要保卫自己吗？为什么你们在删你们自己的国防预算？那这个因为都是外媒讨论，我想要从齐凯利的这个角度去看美国人他们到底真正对这件事情他们的想法是什么？
是不是真的有造成负面印象？
对，没错。然后第二个就是因为川普现在就是他对台湾的可明显他的敌意并就是其实有点强烈，那这个中医就造成说台湾其实疑美论上来了。那所以我想要问他说，以他美国学者的角度，他会不会担心台湾的疑美论会最终可能会影响台美关系
？OK， 好，那我觉得把时间就直接留给齐凯利吧。所以我们来听听齐凯利怎么说吧。Kharis, say hi to our audience here.
Okay, 大家好。
Okay, so Kharis, I will open with this question. Okay, so what are the biggest differences between Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0, especially regarding Taiwan? I think people here in Taiwan think there are huge differences. The attitude is become very unfriendly, but I'd like to know what do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't think Trump's worldview has changed much at all from 1.0 to 2.0. I think it's the same Donald Trump. It's just that the people around him, advising him in positions of power, are a lot different from Trump 1.0. And so the consequence is you're getting a very different kind of foreign policy right out of the gate. Whereas Trump 1.0 took a couple years to kind of figure out who he wanted in power. He cycled through a couple different secretaries of state, a couple different secretaries of defense. This time around, he had a clear plan even before he won the election. So I think we're just seeing a manifestation of what Trump 1.0 was going to become if he had won re-election in 2020.
But but that's how we feel in Taiwan. He becomes so unfriendly. First time he even had a phone call with Tsai Ing-wen, right?
Yeah.
Which was considered a very friendly gesture.
Right.
And this time around, he would talk about like when he was asked about like would U.S. Defend Taiwan if Taiwan got attacked. He never really answered the question. He said, "I'm not going to tell you."
Right.
And then he said that I would never put myself in that position.
Right.
And then when he talked about TSMC, and then he says that Taiwan stole our jobs, stuff like that. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think, from my point of view, I think he's a lot more hostile than 8 years ago.
Well, maybe it's more obvious to people here now, but to me, that's the same Donald Trump that existed in the first term. And specifically on the non-response to the question about whether he would defend Taiwan or not, that is actually very consistent with U.S. policy going back to 1979. And it's only different in the sense that you're comparing it to Joe Biden, who actually explicitly said that he would put Americans in harm's way to defend Taiwan. And so I don't see Trump's statement on Taiwan as a significant departure from U.S. policy.
So Biden was the one who is straight away from the policy, not Trump. That's what you are saying.
I think to the extent there's a difference in their Taiwan policies, Biden was the outlier, not Trump.
Okay, so how about the Indo-Pacific strategy, 印太战略? Okay, I think it was first mentioned by then Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in 2016, and then it was adopted by Trump during his first term. But I seriously doubt would he still hold on this position. What do you think?
Well, I think it's too early to tell. We don't have a clear statement from this administration, what their approach to China, to partners and allies in the region, what are their priorities. We don't really have a clear statement from the president himself or anybody else in his administration that is a kind of definitive expression of their approach. And I think we will get that with the national security strategy and the national defense strategy at some point. But the focus, rightly in my mind, has been on Europe and Ukraine. And the Asia-Pacific has taken a backseat to the more kind of imminent or front and center crises in Europe and in the Middle East.
So after the Ukraine deal, I think, is settled. We don't know when it's going to happen. But,
or even if we'll get a deal. I'm not sure that we ultimately will get a deal that holds, right? Because there seems to be a real divergence of interests between what Ukraine will find acceptable and what Russia will find acceptable. The Russians are taking a kind of maximalist, putting forward a set of maximalist demands that I don't think any of the leaders in Europe would view as acceptable to concede, and certainly not Ukraine. Frankly, I think the large majority of American public opinion would also see that as a sellout to Russia if they accepted all of the demands that Putin is making. And so it's possible we'll get kind of a short-term ceasefire, but I would not. I guess the bigger point here is we're in a period of incredible uncertainty around the world, and much of that is driven by this new administration in the United States, and it's not clear what they will prioritize, what their kind of bottom lines are on various international issues. And so that uncertainty is then generating a lot of shifts around the world.
So are you saying that before the Ukraine matter is settled, Trump probably won't switch his focus back into Indo-Pacific region?
I don't know. I mean, this could drag out for, I hope not, but it could drag out for the rest of his time in office. And at some point, there will be a statement from this administration about their Indo-Pacific strategy. And the starting point, I think, will be the national security strategy from 2017. Because that's Trump 1.0's security strategy. And there will probably be a significant debate within the administration about whether that strategy is adequate, whether you can just kind of copy and paste from there. Whether anything that the Biden administration did is worth adding or saving, or whether they want to do something kind of radical and new in a new national security strategy.
So you are saying that there is a possibility he might abandon the Indo-Pacific strategy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a possibility. I think there's just tremendous uncertainty about what this administration will do. I don't think it's a really high possibility, but it's at least conceivable that Trump could decide he wants to do something very different, and he drags the people in his administration working for him along to that new, pretty radical departure from traditional U.S. policy in the region.
I have to say that from Taiwan's point of view, this make our position very, very difficult because I think we design our defense strategy based on the Indo-Pacific strategy, okay? And then now seeing Trump being like uncertain about it, how are we going to design our defense strategy then? Without United States become like, their goal or their like, we don't know what you guys are going to do, actually.
Well, you've never known that, at least not since 1979, right? So
I think it's become even more ambiguous now.
Yeah, possibly. Let me back up, though, and say a little bit, to the extent we can say what this administration is going to prioritize. There is a consistent worldview that Trump and the people around him now, I think, share. And it's the belief that for at least the last 3 decades, since the end of the Cold War, the United States has borne a disproportionate share of the burden of upholding the global commons. So upholding security, keeping sea lanes free, keeping trade flowing around the world, and so on and so forth. And then on economic matters, the U.S. has been the market of last resort. So any countries that fall into an economic crisis, they can kind of pull themselves out by exporting a bunch of stuff to the United States. And the Trump administration's view, and the people that Trump, from the president on down, their view is that the United States has gotten a bad deal in this relationship with the rest of the world. And he wants to reevaluate bilateral relationships with all of the other countries the U.S. is engaged with, both friends, so partners and allies, but also adversaries.
That including Taiwan.
Including Taiwan. Taiwan's not an exception in this. And so I would start, if you're trying to figure out what the Trump administration might do.
That's what we're trying to do now. So, so what might he do then?
Right. Well, there are 2 elements to this. So one is look at the security balance. And Trump has taken a very kind of crude first cut at this question by asking, how much are you spending on your defense, right? And his first target in this has been European allies, right? Which, let me tell you, there's a kernel of truth to Trump's complaints that the United States is shouldering too much of the burden while partners and allies free ride on what the U.S. is doing. The NATO members are all supposed to spend at least 2% of GDP on defense, and the large majority for decades have not met that commitment. And so Trump, you can criticize his methods, you can certainly criticize the kind of loud, caustic engagement with, longstanding partners and allies. But the effect of Trump's kind of transactional approach has been to focus Europeans on the defense problem in a way that even the invasion of Ukraine did not for 3 years, right? And so from an American perspective, that looks like a potential success down the road to this more kind of crudely transactional approach to partners and allies. And so I think they're going to use the same sort of crude approach to evaluate the relationship with Japan, with Korea, and with Taiwan, all of which face their own security challenges. And so on the Taiwan front, Taiwan is spending, under 3% of GDP on defense. It's hard to explain to an American audience why that's the case, given the just imminent existential threat that Taiwan faces. And even in contrast to South Korea, in the 1990s, South Korea spent about 1/3 more than Taiwan does on its defense budget. Today, they spend about 2/3 more. Does South Korea face a more serious, imminent military threat than Taiwan does? I think it should be the opposite. And so the argument the Trump administration is going to make is you're free riding on the United States. And in fact, this is not just unique to Trump. This is a longstanding complaint privately from American interlocutors when they're talking to their Taiwanese counterparts, that the Taiwanese appear to be willing to fight China to the very last American. They want the Americans to carry the entire burden, right? And so I think that's the first element that Taiwan needs to take very seriously with this administration.
I think people here in Taiwan, I think I have to say that most of us are realistic. Okay, we know that when we have a conflict with China, to depend on American to fight this war for us is unrealistic. I think most of people understand that now. Okay. But I have to say that, about the defense budget, most of the people are saying, yes, it's very low right now. Even for my standard, I think it's too low. Okay, it's below 3%. But I have to say that you said that we have to figure out what Trumps want. That's the thing. Sometimes it's 5%. Sometimes it's the 10%. I don't know. So it seems like he kept changing the target. Okay.
Well.
So what does he want? Is it 5% or 10%?
He wants it to go up, I think, is the simple answer, right? And Trump is not the only one who has made that request of Taiwan. The Biden administration was pushing Taiwan to spend more on defense and to acquire different sorts of capabilities, to revamp its training. And the Biden administration provided a lot of quiet support to help Taiwan do that. There's, a level of military-to-military engagement between the two sides today that wasn't there 5 years ago. And so I think more of that.
Trump would keep that?
Absolutely. I think so.
Okay.
So we've talked about the security piece. The other piece is the economic piece, right? And again, Trump has a very kind of crude first cut at this. What is the trade balance with Taiwan? Well, I just looked up the number today. Taiwan last year had a $70 billion surplus with the United States. And so from Trump's perspective, I'm not saying this is economically literate or correct, but from Trump's perspective, that's a liability that it's a problem for the bilateral relationship, and that trade imbalance should come closer to parity in the future. And so anything that Taiwan can do to signal to the Trump administration that they are opening their markets or purchasing more U.S. goods, it helps the case vis-a-vis this administration.
So do you think that $100 billion of the TSMC investment to United States, do you think Trump is happy with that?
Of course.
Is it enough? My question is that, is it enough?
Well, I mean, more is always better, right? But it certainly was helpful. The PR, the kind of the optics of the CEO of TSMC appearing in the White House next to Trump, and Trump being able to claim credit, and this is the key, Trump being able to claim credit for a major investment in the United States on his watch, that was very politically beneficial, I think, to Taiwan. And so, and this is, let's be clear, this is an investment that will be made over, several years, if not a decade. It's building on an investment that was already there. It makes some commercial sense for TSMC to diversify beyond Taiwan, in part because there aren't enough engineers in Taiwan. Land, labor, electricity, water are all in short supply, and it's hard for TSMC to continue to add capacity here. And And second, there's a demand from U.S. customers, particularly since COVID interrupted supply chains, that the companies building semiconductors not build them all in one place that's potentially vulnerable to a natural or geopolitical disaster. And so TSMC, I think, is responding to a signal demand, partly one that is partly political, but one that is also partly commercial. Their own customers are pushing them to do this. And so I think that announcement was well done by TSMC, and the fact that they had a big public announcement in the White House helps Taiwan's case.
But I like to, but we are talking about the American point of view, right?
Sure.
And then so
I'm an American.
yes,
that's what I'm giving
right.
today.
But I'm going to switch that point of view a little bit.
Okay.
From Taiwan, I think a lot of people would think that because we move all this like production to United States, which means that we reduce our defense capability because we are talking about Silicon Shield before. Is that because we produce so many advanced chips in Taiwan, right. And then it created an incentive for United States to like defend Taiwan, maybe. Okay.
Well, I think the United States still has that incentive. I don't think it will change dramatically whether there are 2 versus 5 fabs in the United States. Taiwan is still the critical node in a global supply chain producing the cutting-edge semiconductors. And so at least what I've seen publicly from TSMC's plans is that they're still going to maintain the most advanced manufacturing, and they will still maintain the large majority of the R&D that goes into developing the next generations of chips in Taiwan, right? And so Taiwan is not transferring everything out. I think the kind of limits of producing in Taiwan, TSMC is now starting to bump up against, right? It's if I remember the statistic right, something like 20% of Taiwan's economy now depends on the semiconductor industry. That's a large share, right? And if right now TSMC is just dominating this industry, but if for whatever reason, geopolitics, natural disasters, just a shift in the market, if TSMC struggles a little bit, Taiwan is actually in a very vulnerable position if it's dependent so heavily on this single company to drive so much of its economic activity.
I think we saw this risk a long time ago. It's just that, but in reality, try to change the situation is a lot more difficult. Yeah. And then but I like to switch back to the military defense budget. Okay. And then in 立法院, I think you heard about the the arguments in the 立法院.
I've heard something about it.
Yeah. Yes, we had a lot of arguments in 立法院 nowadays. And then the KMT's move to cut or froze the defense budget. How was it presented to you when you saw these arguments? Because a lot of people would see it as a move to prove that Taiwanese doesn't want to defend ourselves.
Yeah, so I should say first that I do talk to members of all 3 of the major political parties in Taiwan fairly frequently, and I do understand the point of view of the opposition parties in the legislature, and they would argue that freezing and cutting the defense budget did not undermine Taiwan's ability to defend itself, that they're playing the role of a responsible opposition party. However, I study Taiwan politics. That's my core expertise, and I perhaps am susceptible to this argument or sympathetic to this argument. But the vast majority of people in Washington, D.C. who read this news do not get any of the nuance. They just see the government has proposed spending at this level and the opposition has cut that budget. And the PR from that is terrible in Washington. And so I think the opposition parties in Taiwan have a big PR problem in Washington right now, where they're more and more closely associated with a kind of defeatist perspective in Taiwan. They're not willing to step up and shoulder more of the burden. And there are some people claiming that they are effectively doing China's bidding and selling Taiwan out. And I should say I don't believe that. I think that the efforts by the opposition parties to exercise oversight and supervision of the government are sincere. But they do send, I think, the wrong signal when they cut or freeze the defense budget. That, particularly at this moment in Donald Trump's first month in office, to cut or freeze the defense budget in Taiwan is just terrible timing and terrible optics.
So how do you suggest them to change their optics? Since that the impression is already there,
Yeah.
so how are they going to salvage this situation if they want to?
There's a lot of talk, and there will be inevitably a proposal to pass a special budget to purchase more arms from the United States, potentially to supplement the defense budget. I think it would be a good sign if all three parties had a cross-party consensus to push that through by consensus and not have a big fight in the legislature. Right?
Okay, so you're talking about three-party consensus. I think it's like very long shot.
Okay, but let's talk a little bit about the Li Fa-yuan, right?
Okay.
What you see publicly, the fights are the things that one side or the other wants to get to the point where there's a fight. There is actually a lot of stuff that passes the legislature still via cross-party consensus. There's not a roll call vote. You just have the party caucuses come together, the leaders of the party caucuses sign, and it goes through, right? There's other legislation that perhaps the KMT wants to pass, but the TPP does not want to pass. And so the KMT doesn't bring it up because they know the TPP doesn't have the votes. And so you may get this, I would say it's a biased impression of how closely the TPP and the KMT are working together on legislation, because stuff that the TPP opposes that the KMT supports never actually makes it to public view in the legislature. I perhaps am a bit more optimistic.
Yes,
you
you are.
Might call me naive, but I think there is more cooperation that happens in the Li Fa-yuan.
I'm hoping that that's the case. Okay, I'm hoping that. But I have to. The other thing I like to talk about is the U.S. skepticism.
Yes.
It has become more and more popular.
Yes.
Okay, so what should we do then? Whatever Trump is saying and doing right now, you said that it's not, I think, from your point of view, it might not stray away from the U.S. policy for a long time policy. However, I think people here doesn't understand that. What we see, a lot of us see, is that there's a big step back from Biden's position. So do you worry that this U.S. skepticism is become more and more popular?
I do worry about it. I worry about it a lot. And I think there's good reason to be skeptical of the United States. I can understand where that skepticism is coming from. It's not just in Taiwan that publics around the world, publics around the world have increasing skepticism about the United States because of who the president of the United States is, the kind of dramatic departure of his policies and his rhetoric, especially from all past administrations, and the just enormous uncertainty about what he might do. So this is a global phenomenon. It's not just limited to Taiwan. The problem is that Taiwan is so vulnerable and so much more dependent on the relationship with the United States for its security and its future than almost any other country in the world, that this rising skepticism does potentially pose a challenge to Taiwan's future. Perhaps we should talk a little bit about the underlying kind of stabilizers in the Taiwan-U.S. relationship. One is public opinion in the United States, which is broadly supportive of Taiwan, very positive towards Taiwan in general. Members of Congress of both political parties almost unanimously voiced support for Taiwan. And in the foreign policy establishment, the majority of kind of traditional foreign policy experts and officials view Taiwan as an extremely important ally and, well, I should say partner of the United States. And so those things have not changed with the election of Donald Trump.
However, with that, you're talking about the public opinions or the Congress, when they are indifferent with Trump, I don't think either of them can, sway Trump's position at all.
Well, it depends. I think we have seen in the past, in Trump's first term, moments where he reversed himself, where he reached out to adversaries of the United States, attempted to strike a deal, and didn't get a deal that was to his liking, and then made a big switch and actually received a lot of support for that. I think he does, despite his rhetoric, pay some attention to public opinion and pay some attention to what members of Congress think. And I think that will become more important. So we should note, Trump right now is at the peak of his powers, right? And this is a general pattern in U.S. politics. You've got a president who's just been elected, who claims a mandate, who has a majority of his own party in both houses of Congress. This is the moment when that president can push through a lot of changes. But from day one, their power starts eroding, right? And Trump right now is really throwing his weight around in the federal government and trying to push through pretty drastic changes to the way the federal government works. And he has kind of a window in which people are too terrified in Congress or throughout the country to challenge him directly. But he is also becoming less popular by the day. His approval ratings are already underwater. Their negatives are higher than the positives. And given the economic uncertainty, turbulence in the markets, the rise of inflation that I think can be directly attributed to Trump's economic policies, I expect that trend to continue downward. And so he is going to be faced, I think, with a Congress that gets a little bolder in opposing him. He's potentially going to lose his majority in the House, if not the Senate.
In midterm.
In 2026. I think in the House, it's very likely the Dems take the House. And so while Trump is trying to create this appearance that he is omnipotent, that he is all-powerful, and he's able to do whatever the heck he wants, he's already running into a bunch of obstacles, and I think he's likely to run into more going forward.
So I had a bet with Kharis, okay, about midterm election, and then I was saying that because with Trump, the support for Trump is very strong. I think American probably would give Trump more time, so that midterm usually you would benefit the other party. This time I said that probably won't show. So. He will continue, but I think American public would give him more time to finish his agenda. So you don't think that's the case?
I'm with Kharis.
Okay.
I don't think that's the case. And in fact, historically, I mean, Trump had a positive approval rating when he took office. That was virtually the only time in his time in public office that he has had favorables above unfavorables. But that's already changed, right? And so historically, he's a pretty unpopular president, given that he's less than 2 months into his second term. I mean, just to give you a contrast, like Obama, when he was first elected in 2008, his public opinion approval ratings were over 60%. George W. Bush, after 9/11, was well over 80%. So Trump is nowhere near those highs, even in his first month in office, right? I think that there are some kind of regularities of American politics that have not gone away. The idea that Donald Trump won in the last election because the Democrats are fading, they're falling apart. I mean, the Democrats lost that election by 1.5% of the vote. It was not a huge sweeping mandate for Donald Trump or what he stood for. 2024 was not a good year to be an incumbent party anywhere in the world. And a big part of the reason for that was kind of the COVID hangover and the inflation and kind of economic turmoil that came with the shift out of the COVID era. I actually don't see the loss of the Democrats as a sign that they are in terminal decline, as some people have argued in the U.S. And if past is prologue in the United States, we're likely to see immense unhappiness with this president going into the midterms, and that's likely to be reflected in the midterm vote.
But I have to say, I don't see Democrats doing anything at all.
Democrats don't have a majority in either house of Congress.
Yeah.
So
still,
they don't have the votes.
They don't have the votes, yes. But, in the first term, when Trump was elected, we saw a lot of protests down the street. We don't see it this time around.
Well, I think there are protests. There was a big protest in Washington, D.C. a few days ago. There are certainly protests in California, where I live. There are protests outside Tesla dealerships all over the Bay Area right now. There are protests on university campuses right now. So perhaps it's not being reported in the same way here, but I do see a significant, deep concern from large swaths of American civil society about the actions of this administration.
I'd like to go back to Ukraine a little bit. Here in Taiwan, there's a saying it's very popular nowadays. It's like 今日乌克兰，明日台湾. Okay, you know what does that mean, right? I mean, so when Trump is I have to say it troubles me a lot is that when we're talking about the future of Afghanistan, and then we don't see Afghanistan government at the negotiation table, okay? And then when we talk about Palestine, we don't see the Palestinian on the table. And this time in Ukraine, when they first start talking, Trump's first move was not talking to Zelensky. He was, he talked to Putin instead.
Right.
So here in Taiwan, I have to wonder. So when the time comes one day when we have to negotiate about the future of Taiwan, would Trump really talk to China directly and ignore Taiwan altogether?
That's a fair question, and all three of those examples are deeply troubling to me as well. And I think, I think any U.S. president should engage with allies and partners before they engage with adversaries. And so Trump's, in particular, his engagement with the Putin regime in Russia is deeply troubling to me. That said, I think Taiwan and the Taiwan-Ukraine comparison I think it obscures more than it illuminates. I think Taiwan is very different in many ways to the United States than Ukraine is, or Palestine, or Afghanistan. For one, the relationship goes back to June 1950. There's 75 years of history now in that relationship. The U.S. most Americans couldn't find Afghanistan on a map until 9/11, right? The Palestinian issue, the U.S. has long had a clear preference for supporting Israel over Palestine. And so, as much as it pains me to say, the U.S. has pretty consistently sided with the Israelis in that conflict, rather than maintaining a more kind of neutral posture. And on the Ukraine issue, the U.S. didn't really have a pre-existing relationship with Ukraine until the 1990s, and then that relationship was still quite basic, quite shallow. Taiwan also is a much more important economic partner to the United States. So last year, Taiwan was the United States' 7th largest trading partner. Ukraine in 2022, before the invasion, was the 67th largest trading partner of the United States. And Taiwan also has a really important symbolic value within the Asia-Pacific region as an indicator of what the U.S. will do with other allies in the region as well. And so, and in particular, this administration, the Trump administration, if not Trump himself, then the people around him have pretty consistently emphasized that they would prioritize the Indo-Pacific over Europe if the U.S. has to prioritize one region. And so Taiwan is a linchpin in the Indo-Pacific, both economically and geographically. And so I actually think Taiwan is an order of magnitude more important to this administration than Ukraine is.
Okay, but do you think this logic, your logic, like when you said that the prioritize Indo-Pacific than European, I still don't see it happening though. Am I being too impatient? So I don't see any sign of that at all.
Any sign of
like the U.S. Like Trump administration is actually prioritize the Indo-Pacific region over European. I don't see that.
Well, that desire to prioritize the Indo-Pacific is actually kind of a through line going all the way back to the Obama administration. And it's, so multiple presidents, both Democratic and Republican, have wanted to shift U.S. attention and capabilities to the region and away from Europe and the Middle East. The problem is Europe and the Middle East have hot conflicts going on, right? And the nature of the kind of U.S. approach to the world is that time and attention kind of gravitates towards whatever the crisis of the day is. The Indo-Pacific, fortunately, in my view, doesn't have a hot crisis right now. And so each administration has, in practice, struggled to implement that. The other reason that shift has been delayed and half-hearted, I think, is that the United States hasn't been able to get the Europeans to step up and bear more of the burden in Europe so that the U.S. can shift more attention and resources to the Indo-Pacific. The news out of Germany from last week, where they've actually agreed to lift their budget constraints and invest a significant amount of money into a kind of common European defense pool, is a game changer potentially, and might actually allow this administration to really move more material and attention to the Indo-Pacific. So I share your concern. I agree that the United States, I don't think, has followed up the rhetoric with real, with the level of material resources to the region, but that the missing piece there was more burden sharing by U.S. partners and allies, and we potentially are in a moment where that is starting to happen.
Okay.
The other thing I'll note is this administration, one of the ironic elements of this administration's foreign policy approach is that they are, at least Donald Trump, is inclined to play nice with Russia, in part because of the fear that China poses the much bigger existential threat to U.S. interests in the world. And that the U.S., there are at least people around Trump who make this argument. I don't know if Trump himself believes it, but there are people around Trump who argue that the United States cannot afford to take on both Russia and China in a kind of Cold War 2.0. And therefore, the U.S. should look to drive a wedge between them, or at least weaken that bond. And if you have to pick one or the other to try to reach out to, we should reach out to Russia rather than China. China is the bigger, more powerful adversary, and the one that really does pose a more existential long-term threat to U.S. interests. And so from that perspective, Taiwan plays a very different role in a kind of long-term competition with another adversary in the world than Ukraine does.
But do you think Trump had successfully drive an edge between Russia and China already?
No. And I am skeptical about the ability that his ability to do that. But I'm just trying to give you a sense of what the thinking is among some people around Donald Trump, that there may be good reason, kind of real politics strategy here to reach out to Russia to consider some of Russia's demands, and, if necessary, to make some concessions to Russia in order to weaken the bond between Russia and China, and to avoid being in a position where the United States is facing off against both Russia and China in a competition for world hegemony.
Okay, so so what do you think we should do? How do we approach Trump? I mean, there are people saying that, dealing with Trump, you have to appease before negotiation. Okay, which means that keeping happy is very important. Do you agree? So does Taiwan have any cards other than the TSMC that we could leverage?
Yeah, well, I think it doesn't hurt to develop a personal relationship with Donald Trump. The most prominent example of this in Trump 1.0 was Shinzo Abe from Japan, flying to the United States the day after the U.S. election, really investing a lot of time and energy in trying to build that personal relationship. From what I could tell, it did seem to pay dividends in Japan's relationship with the U.S. in the first Trump administration. The challenge that Taiwan faces is almost unique, though, in that there are unique limits on the leader of Taiwan's ability to engage directly with the leader of the United States.
Lai Ching-te is no way to going to the United States. I don't think so.
Lai Ching-te cannot meet the president of the United States
possible.
under current U.S. policy.
Right.
So Taiwan will need to get creative, I think, if they're trying to engage in some kind of personal diplomacy. So Taiwan has lots of experience over many decades finding ways around these restrictions on formal contacts with lots of other countries around the world. And so, for instance, sending Morris Chang to APEC as Tsai Ing-wen's representative back in the day. That was, I think, a creative way to leverage some of Taiwan's soft power in a way that helps its diplomatic relations. And so I hope the Lai administration is thinking creatively about how they might develop a personal relationship with with Trump himself or with other people in his administration. Certainly worth trying, I think. I don't think it's neither necessary nor sufficient to strengthen the U.S.-Taiwan relationship, but it can't hurt to try.
But how about the other question? Does Taiwan have any cards other than TSMC to leverage?
Well, so traditionally, the United States has had a longstanding interest in Taiwan's, de facto autonomy for four big reasons. One is its geographic location in the first island chain. So that was the original reason the United States intervened to prevent the PLA from coming across the strait. The U.S., to the extent the administration of the United States sees China as a threat to U.S. interests in the Western Pacific, Taiwan still has an important role to play, and particularly in keeping the PLA bottled up within the first island chain. It would be a pretty dramatic shift in the power balance in the region if the PLA were to operate out of Taiwan, for instance. So there's a very kind of hard-edged realist reason for the United States to care about Taiwan's long-term future. The second is Taiwan's development into an alternative to the PRC. So Taiwan's development into a very rich, prosperous, democratic polity provides, I think, still a potential model if someone more liberal or enlightened was to come to power in the PRC and contemplate some kind of political reform. I think the U.S. has had a longstanding interest in seeing Taiwan's democracy do well, and it maintain a market economy. Taiwan also has symbolic value as a kind of demonstration of the U.S.'s enduring commitment to other partners and allies in the region. And Taiwan's so its presence in the first island chain, its own market economy. I'm forgetting the fourth.
Okay,
Sorry.
that's fine. But Kharis, we just produced a video about like first island chain, about our like unique position, and then a lot of comments says that your theory is outdated.
Okay, how so?
They think that with Trump in the office, he might not think the first chain theory is that important anymore.
Well, the question is whether the United States cares about being able to operate in the Western Pacific militarily, whether the U.S. cares about preserving maritime trading routes in the Western Pacific and being able, if it came to it, to keep them open, even if the PRC tried to block them or coerce them. And that military challenge becomes a lot harder if the PLA is operating out of Taiwan.
Yeah, but do you think Trump think this is important? Like the trade route is important? Do you think he believes it is important?
I think Trump cares a lot about the United States image in the world. It's in particular understanding of U.S. power in the world. And if the U.S. right now does operate in the region, and if the United States were to be in a position where they couldn't, the military couldn't operate in the region, that would be a significant blow to U.S. prestige in the world, and also I think the public opinion hit in the United States would be pretty severe.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The other thing is about DEI. Okay. I think, Taiwan probably is the most DEI country in Asia. We use it as a propaganda, try to pose to the world. It's like we are a progressive liberal country. Okay. So with Trump in the office, do you think we have to change the approach? Because I haven't seen the administration do anything about that. We're still very focused on climate change. We're still very focused on LGBTQ community, propaganda-wise. All right. So do you think to deal with Trump administration, we should change this strategy?
I think the more important thing is to return to the two things I started with, which is how is Taiwan helping to shoulder more of the burden for its own security, and the economic relationship? Is Taiwan doing its part to open up its own markets to U.S. goods? I think the conversation about Taiwan's own kind of domestic approach to social issues that's for Taiwan to decide. And it's possible it gets caught up in the U.S. culture wars, but the United States is not going to support Japan more than Taiwan because Japan doesn't have same-sex marriage and Taiwan does. I think that's a distraction from what are the core things that Taiwan could do to strengthen the relationship.
But it just seems that Trump really prefer the conservative kind of people.
Well, socially conservative?
Yeah, socially conservative.
I mean, Trump himself is not particularly socially conservative or traditional.
But he's crowd.
But he's using social issues as a wedge, as a kind of political cudgel, and he's appointed a significant number of people who are empowered to roll back diversity initiatives in the federal government. They've taken that in some cases to that they're targeting private universities now. They're targeting state and local governments. They're targeting law firms and private companies. I think at some point there's going to be a backlash to the backlash as well. And so I don't think Taiwan should just try to ride whatever the current wave or the current kind of trend is in the U.S. culture wars. I think Taiwan should worry about, in the bilateral relationship at least, I think Taiwan should worry about strengthening the kind of economic and security relations between the two countries.
We have been talking to a lot of experts like you, okay, about how to deal with Trump. And then there are people suggest that we should lay low, like the Taiwan issue, like, less invisible as possible. And then just that Rubio to take the reign. And then, because, so there are one side of the suggestion is to lay low, but there are other people saying that, no, you have to make yourself very visible. You have to present more to Trump, like the importance of Taiwan, okay? So which side are you on? Do you think we should lay low or we should be more high profile?
I don't think it's a good thing when Taiwan is a target of the presidential administration in the United States, when they are really focused on Taiwan as a potential irritant or troublemaker in the U.S.-China relationship. I think the ability to do the kind of quiet, pragmatic diplomacy, people-to-people ties, military exchanges, and so on and so forth, it's much easier to do that kind of thing when Taiwan is not front and center in the U.S.-China relationship. And so I tend to favor path one, which is Taiwan should be pragmatic and should look for ways to engage with the U.S. on the sorts of practical concerns that the two sides have.
The last question is that, because I heard this a lot lately, okay, we are talking about the U.S. skepticism. And also there are people saying in Taiwan, says that Taiwan should talk to China right now because we should not depend on United States this much, because look at Trump, so how reliable he is, okay? So do you think we have any room to do that? I mean, really approach China and then, maybe leaning more close to China a little bit than where we are right now?
Yeah, that's a hard question, and it's an excellent one, and I don't necessarily have the answer to it. The current leader of Taiwan, Lai Ching-te, is simply by fact of being a member of the DPP and his kind of past political history, is viewed with deep, almost insurmountable skepticism in Beijing. It's not clear to me what he could say or do that would convince Beijing that it was worth it to engage with him. And I think he came to that conclusion himself very early on.
But we have other parties.
You do have other parties, and I don't think it's a bad thing for more people-to-people engagement to take place across the strait. I worry quite a bit that Beijing has a poorer and poorer understanding of the kind of public opinion dynamics and the political dynamics in Taiwan, because so few mainland scholars and analysts and officials can come over here. Let me give you a kind of nuanced answer then. I would say probably not the top leadership in Taiwan is going to be able to engage with their counterparts in a meaningful way. But that doesn't mean you can't open more doors for people-to-people exchanges. I just think the climate on both sides of the strait right now is so suspicious and hostile that it would take a really bold, kind of courageous effort from people on both sides to make that change. But it's worth it to try. I think the payoffs, and I should note, particularly for Taiwan, you want people on the mainland to understand better, not to be able to tell lies to themselves about what's happening in Taiwan. Oh, the Taiwanese are all brainwashed by the DPP, and things will change. Once the DPP is out of office, and then you get a more China-friendly party in office, and then people will wake up and want unification again. That's not what's happening here, right? And so the more that mainland China scholars can come and understand dynamics in Taiwan, the more they can have a real probably not words they want to hear, or not a kind of understanding they want, but It is better, I think, for both sides if there's clarity on what's driving public opinion, what the Taiwanese people want.
Okay, so this is our last question. Okay, so if we talk about a lot of issues today, so if there's one message you think our audience can take home, what would you like it to be?
Yeah, I think focus on the things that you can control here in Taiwan, and don't get too wrapped up in whatever the news of the day is in the United States right now, where there's a lot of noise relative to the actual kind of concrete signal, and it's impossible to forecast where the United States will be in, say, 2 or 3 years. And so given that uncertainty, focus on the things that Taiwan itself can control. So Taiwan's own kind of priorities as reflected in its annual budget, Taiwan's own approach to economic relations with the region, and frankly, the cross-strait relationship. You don't need the U.S. to get involved to make changes to that relationship. That, I think, is the most important message I could send today.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
那我们来讲一下 take away 好了啦哈。
Okay.
我今天最重要的一个 take away 一个很重要的印象就是说，其实拜登说要出兵协防台湾，才是真正偏离美国长久以来对台政策的人。
齐凯丽还说他是 outlier。
对，所以其实他真正偏离美国一向的对台政策的其实是拜登。OK，那我们可能对于拜登这个常常讲说他会一定会出兵协防台湾这个说法太过熟悉，所以川普上来的时候，他其实只是回到
原本的正轨，
原本的这个位置的时候，我们大家听了就不大习惯啊。那而且他还强调说，美国其实一直对台政策都是执行所谓的模糊战略。可是我来看的话，就是也太模糊了一点吧。现在真的太模糊了一点吧。如果我们两个是队友的话，我们至少要知道说你的防守区域要到哪里啊，不然的话，我觉得现在就是我们到底是要守，我们就是要守全部就对了。我现在也没别的法子啦，就是要守全部这样子。然后另外一个我印象很深刻的就是他提到立法院对于国防预算在争吵的这件事情，虽然Kharis 他有强调说他是长期在研究台湾的，所以他跟3个党都有谈过，所以他知道他们在说什么。可是的确在华府已经造成一个负面印象，就是说觉得台湾呢还在减国防预算，台湾对于防卫自己这件事情不够认真。OK， 所以这个负面印象其实已经形成了。那现在就要想办法收拾想办法收拾这件事情。说实在，我会觉得执政党不能够两手一摊就说没办法，我们在野党就是这样，这没办法。其实现在就是执政党，你现在就是必须要扛起来。我其实除了齐凯丽之外，我们其实谈了很多学者那这些学者因为他们来台湾，其实相关的认识的人也很多啦，私底下的时候，他们也常会讲，他们有点担忧，因为觉得现在的政府，台湾的赖政府弹性不够。然后我自己会觉得创意也不够。OK， 我觉得在讲到很多这个对川普的这个应对上面我觉得听起来都好像还是老调常谈。然后尤其面对川普这么难缠的一个对手，可能要更有创意一点。
尤其 Kharis 他其实提到说，像怎么跟川普打交道，他说有个蛮重要，就是建立一个比较私人的关系，像比如说安倍晋三这么厉害，对啊。那他有提到说，台湾其实这个经验，台湾应该是很丰富了，就是用各种间接的方法去建立这个关系。那我觉得对啊，台湾或许就是要想办法，我们应该就是要想办法，就是用这种创意的方法，如何不可能直接见到本人，但是可以建立一个比较台面下的关系，这我相信可以在这个推动台美关系上面是很重要。
对，另外一个Kharis讲到一个很重要的一点就是说跟中国的关系。台湾现在可能也不能像以前那么就是民进党一再的这个政策的这个立场恐怕也要弹性一点我觉得Kharis一再在强调说，就中国跟台湾之间人对人 的这个关系其实是可以加强的。
对，他其实
我觉得他讲的是有，你觉得他讲有没有道理？我觉得他讲的是有道理的。
我觉得他其实 focus 在一点上面，就是刚刚讲人与人关系嘛。他其实讲的不是高层对高层，而是人与人关系。那人与人关系为什么重要？其实就是增加双方彼此在基层对于对方的了解，对啊，像我们过去不断聊到说，我们现在对于中国内部情形到底怎么样，我们不了解。其实反过来，他们也对我们的状况其实很不了解。这个反而就会增加双方彼此对内在 propaganda 的时候的一个问题，就是反正他们就是都该死啦，我们就冲啊，武统吧，这样。
对，所以我觉得这个部分，我觉得以前啦哈，就是说觉得这个美国很可靠的话，我觉得你可能还觉得说跟中国的民众对话没有那么重要。可是我现在的确是觉得美国看起来蛮不可靠的我觉得真的蛮不可靠的我觉得跟中国的民众，我觉得至少啦，如果就算高层对话没有办法做到的话，至少跟中国的民众之间这个互相了解，我觉得可能是时候需要加强了。我是同意这个部分，我其实是同意 Kharis 啦。好啦，你的 take away 呢？
其实他在讲到说川普对于这个世界观的想法，其实他就讲了，就是美国真的觉得他花太多的钱在维持世界秩序上面，这个不是川普个人，而是整个从下到上都这样。我还记得我们一开始去1年多前我们访问翁宇中的时候，他就有讲说，其实拜登政府也这样想啊，完全没有错啊，对啊，所以这个其实就是不过那其实 Kharis 有提到说，所以台湾真正要做其实就2件事，第一个增加我们的国防预算，你要展现一下你的意志，就是我们要守卫台湾。第二个就是真的要想办法去平衡美国跟台湾贸易逆差。你看魏哲家宣布一个1000亿美金的投资案，川普多爽啊！其实爽的不只是川普，我相信其实整个美国其实都蛮开心的。
我们希望这样子够啦因为马上那个4月初川普就会对这个关税政策做进一步的宣布了我们就要来看看台湾有没有在榜上咯。
是
OK， 好，那我们今天讨论就到这边咯。那如果大家有什么意见的话，非常欢迎来留言告诉我们也可以告诉我们说你们想要邀谁啦，或是谈什么议题。OK， 我觉得最近好像那个热门的议题比较少一点。
关税大刀要下去了，说不定关税要再聊了。
我觉得大家好像对这些的议题关心的比较少一点。OK， 好，那所以喜欢我们节目的话，应该要
按赞、订阅、分享、抖内。
好，谢谢大家。